So welcome everyone to the introductory workshop on state aid for public library grants. We think that this is probably a topic that some of you have experience with and some of you don't, but it's always good to get a refresher if you've done this before. And if you haven't done it before, I really thank you for taking the time to take this webinar. It's not a simple grant program. It is a state grant program, which means there's lots and lots of paperwork and technicalities to understand as you go through the process. So we appreciate that you're taking the time to learn the ins and outs of the grant program and give yourself a fighting chance to be successful if this is your year to apply. So our goal today is to introduce the program parameters, what the process looks like, what the timeline is, and how to position yourself for success. It's not as straightforward as you might think, and those of you that have gone through it before can definitely attest to that. In fact, if you haven't applied before, you might want to talk to one of your peers who has to see what it's like from their perspective, not just my perspective as the administrator. But I will say that this workshop is designed to basically give you all the answers to the test, as will a follow-up workshop in June, which will be a technical assistance workshop to help you fill out the application if you decide to move forward this year. So Mid-Hudson does its best to give you as much support possible as you move through this process. So again, thanks for joining us, and here we go. So this is a state program, oddly enough, since it's called the State Aid for Public Library Construction Grant Program. This is actually an allotment that we have to advocate for every year at the state level in Albany. It's interestingly enough not budgeted into the budget, it's bonded through the budget. So what the budget does is approve the Dormitory Authority of New York to bond for $14 million that will be put towards public library construction in New York State. So unfortunately, we don't have access to all of that money. Mid-Hudson only receives a portion of that to divvy up amongst its 66 member libraries. And our amount for the coming year will be $525,554, as you can see there. And interestingly enough, many of our libraries will apply, and they will ask for far more than the state gives us, which means that there are even more parameters to put in place at the system level, because the system actually administers the grant program on behalf of the Division of Library Development, which is the area of the State Education Department that oversees this state aid program. So the $14 million is divided up amongst the 23 public library systems, and then each of the systems have to have their own process in place for handling applications from its member libraries. So today what we're going to do is cover both the state parameters, which are defined within the Commissioner's regulations. So I've boiled those down for you and picked out the high points that are easy for you to figure out today. But of course, you could always go on to the Division of Library Development's website and read regulations for yourself. If you don't believe me, you're certainly welcome to do that too. But then we have to dovetail that with the process here at the Mid-Hudson Library System, because we get requests for about 2.5 times more than the money we have to give out, unfortunately. So that means we have to create criteria that helps us rank applications for funding, because we can't help fund everybody's project anymore. So it's a very competitive process. And I'm going to reiterate that through our time together this afternoon, and we're going to point out some of the ways you can position yourself for success as we move forward. So in terms of the grant program period, this is probably more complicated than you would expect, but the first one's really easy, right? It's a 3-year grant program period, but it actually starts July 1st of this year, and the application, we're going to go through the whole timeline, is due after that. So there's a couple of touch points to understand in terms of what aspects of your project that you're requesting funding for, which parts of it are eligible if you've already done some work on your project, or you think you might finish fairly quickly if it's a really simple project. So I want to just walk you through these timestamps in terms of the grant program period. It starts July 1st and it goes through June 30th, 2018, which is a fairly long time. But many of you might be right on the cusp of a project or might have already started a project a little bit, so there is a little wiggle room here with the start date. However, it's important to understand that only things that you've spent money on that are eligible under the grant program that you expended after July 1st, the beginning of the grant program, are eligible for us to reimburse you for under the program. So, for example, if you had a bathroom renovation project and you already happen to have bought a couple of the fixtures for the bathroom, if you spent that money now here in April, we wouldn't be able to reimburse you for them. But as you can see, if you made that expenditure between the beginning of the year year and June 30th, you could use that expenditure as part of your matching funds proof, which would be useful because it would mean less of the cash in your pocket would have to be used for the match. So it's very clear no expenditures made prior to January 1st can be included. And the other thing I should add here is that your project cannot be complete before the system's deadline for your application. So that's going to be in August. I'll show you the timeline in a little bit. But that's another timestamp to keep in mind, that it'd be best if you had not started your project yet at the time of application. But if you did, again, there's a little bit of wiggle room here, but not a lot. So that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about what you might like to apply for this year. So I said I'm going to stress this. I gave it its whole own slide to really drive home this is a competitive grant program. We've had libraries over the past 2 years that have not been funded after going through the process, so it can happen. So again, studying this process and what the board, the Mid-Hudson Board, is looking for is really important. Brush up on your grant writing skills. I know at Mid-Hudson we try to keep things as simple as possible, but this is not a process that we control. So when you're being pitted against each other, it's time to really go all out. When you're making the case and writing about what the impact is that this project's going to have on the public and your ability to serve the public, really take the extra time to write a paragraph about the impact of your project. You will be judged on your impact statements, and it's really important that you take it seriously. I have to say those libraries that kind of do this all at the last minute and some of the paperwork comes in and some of it doesn't, it really doesn't look good to the committee that's judging your application and ranking it against other libraries who have really gone all out with photos and case statements and doing the demographic work they need to do to make the case for the project that they're doing. So just please always keep in mind it is competitive, and if you don't make it, there's a real chance you might not get anything. That can happen. So we're going to talk about a lot of information today, and I don't want your hands to get sore as you're trying to write down everything. So I actually created a website which I've got as a repository for many of the things we're going to talk about here today, and I'll give you the URL at the end so you can go and grab some of the information that we're going to be covering here today. So anytime you see an asterisk on a slide, that means that information or supplementary information about that item is available online, which you'll be able to download, so you don't have to feel like you have to write down absolutely everything you're seeing on the screen right now. So as I mentioned, the Mid-Hudson Board has to cull out and rank the applications that are best positioned for funding through our program since it's competitive. So the Mid-Hudson Board has set priorities for funding that they use to judge your application on. And the very first thing they take a look at is whether or not your library and your board have taken the time to holistically assess the needs of your facility. Is it something they just came up with last night, oh yeah, we'll apply for this, or is it part of a plan that's been prioritized, or you've done a whole building assessment, you've identified that you've got some handicap accessibility needs as well as energy conservation issues, as well as a need to expand, and you're going to address them in phases. So the more thought that you've put into what you're asking for, and the better able you are to demonstrate that you've done your due diligence to see what's really necessary, where's the most bang for the buck, those things strengthen your application. So we know not every library has a facility plan. We'd certainly like to see you have one, and we have an outline that you can use for that. I have it in a Microsoft Word document if you don't have one and are interested in getting a plan together to help your board figure this kind of stuff out. But you also can use the Construction Needs Action Memo, which is due on May 8th. All directors have received that at this point. The first part of that action memo is asking you to prioritize and show us what are the things that are next on your plate to be addressing from your facility, and which one of those things is one of the things you will be applying for. So it's in the context of your facility plan. So this year we're also asking for you to attach the board-approved facility plan to the action memo to show that your board has given thought as to where the best place is to spend the money. Over time, we've learned to help libraries do this because we've had situations where libraries have applied for things and then the next year want to apply for something that would undo what they spent money on the year before. For example, a library that wanted to do half of their roof instead of the whole roof. So there's cost efficiencies to be had when libraries take the time to do the good planning when it comes to their facility. And now the Mid-Hudson Board is looking to see, have you done that due diligence to do good work, prioritize the things that need to get done, and you're asking for things that make sense. The second part of their funding priorities is actually, I think, really well thought out. These are not ranked in terms of which is more important than the other. All three are equally important in the Mid-Hudson Board's perspective, but they are looking for projects that provide an increase to service. So they're taking a look at a project that might be able to increase the usable public space. So maybe you could create a different area in your library to have more public access computers or larger programming space, or create programming space where there never was any before, or something that might help improve your staff's ability to do their job. So a reconfiguration of your circulation desk area, or something that helps processing take place in the back room faster so you can get books on the shelf faster. Again, things that are going to increase services, increase public usable space, and staff efficiencies are highly attractive projects to be funded through this program. The second priority that they're taking a look at is, are you increasing access to your facility? And that can come in now two different forms. This is slightly tweaked from years past. We've always been highly interested in helping make public buildings handicap accessible in our system. That's something that all boards should be striving for. If your library building is not currently completely handicap accessible, there should be a plan in place that your board takes a look at every year to address how to make your building handicap accessible. So if that's part of your goal, is to make your building handicap accessible, that's absolutely a priority for our board to help fund. They've also clarified that they're also interested when you can optimize a space to bring in a new or underserved population, which could fit the traditional definition of handicap accessibility. But now they're also thinking about, is it something that could actually help you bring in a population, area of your population that's never come into the library before. Maybe you're creating an area, maybe you have a large Spanish-speaking population who don't feel welcome at the library because you have no space to have resources or technology that they're able to interact with. And if the point of your project is to optimize the space to bring in that underserved population or a brand new population that had never been able to come in before, that also would fall under this category of an increase to access your building. So that one's, I think, pretty straightforward. The third one is, I think, very forward-thinking of our board. They're very interested in energy conservation projects, but they realize that that can be a subjective term, how you're saving energy in the library. But there's lots of tools out there to help you figure out what the best things are to invest in to increase the energy efficiency of your building. So the board's made it clear that when they're looking at a project that is just about energy conservation, they want to see that it wasn't the contractor that told you it would be energy efficient. They've actually had third-party verification that what you're going to attempt will reduce your energy load or create an environment that's easier to heat and cool, and again, be more energy efficient. So they're looking for any project that's going to be applied for that's saying, yes, we meet your energy conservation standard, to at the very least have done an energy assessment, sometimes it's called an audit, an energy assessment by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, which is also called NYSERDA, and that's one of the links you'll find on the website I'll give you at the end of the program, where you can click on that and figure out how to have that done if you haven't already. So we will be looking for copies of your audit, and that's something that may or may not be under your control when you get that done. So if you're making a to-do list when you're thinking about what project you're going to apply for, and you were thinking about something that would probably be sold under the guise of energy conservation, you're going to want to hop on getting an energy assessment scheduled sooner rather than later. There's also a new document that the board produced last year that addresses what their priorities are, or what their standard is, basically, for when you're doing something like a useful life replacement. What we found over time, and you'll see this in a couple slides, is that an eligible costs are things like a new roof or new windows, new doors, increasing the insulation in your building. But we also want to make sure you're doing it at the appropriate level. So we've provided guidance on that, and there's a document you'll find on the site I'll give you in a few minutes that very clearly says the Mid-Hudson Board is looking for you to meet Energy Star standards when you're doing what we call useful life replacement projects. So that's if you're going for a new roof, if you have to replace your boiler or your furnace, if you're putting in new windows, we're looking to make sure that your bid specs actually meet Energy Star standards, and those are all outlined for you in a document that you'll have at your beck and call through the website. So it's something to educate yourself about if that's something that you're looking to do. As I said, said, our board has really taken, I think, a forward-looking role in terms of energy conservation projects, and that's just one of the ways they're doing that. Another way is that they've really made a public statement now that they're looking for innovative projects that are pushing the envelope, excuse the pun, for libraries that want to be certified in energy conservation and more green building, sustainable building techniques. So these are 4 very commonly accepted certification programs. So this is for libraries that are thinking of building a new building, doing a major renovation or expansion project, or those libraries that are looking at energy conservation and looking to optimize the operation of their building. Each of these has something to offer. And if you'd like more information, this is something that I specialize in. I'm actually a lead accredited professional. So these are 4 programs that you could take a look at. Again, if you're building a brand new building, doing a serious renovation or expansion project, these 4 areas, you might want to take a look at these and pick one of them to use as your guidance as you're thinking about how to make the best possible choices for the future of your community. Our library buildings are teaching tools in and of themselves, and if libraries are able to demonstrate a commitment to making sustainable choices, it helps tell the story of what a sustainable organization we are, what good stewards we are of the public's dollars and the public's trust. So I think the Mid-Hudson Board is really setting a great example here of encouraging our libraries to think more sustainably when they're addressing issues with the building and expanding their buildings, to use less natural resources, to be more energy efficient, to be taking a look at water conservation measures, all sorts of things that are good for the local environment, the local tax dollars, and also the global environment as a whole. So if this isn't something that's been on your radar, I encourage you to learn more about it. As I said, it's a particular interest of mine and something I am actually certified in. If you'd like more information, I'm, as you can tell, more than happy to talk about that with you. So let's get down to the actual eligible costs, and these are, again, from the Education Commissioner's regulations that govern the state aid program. And again, this is something that you could read about in the regulations. You'll see there's not much more language than I'm giving you here. So what you see here is pretty much what you'd get if you were looking at the regulation. So very clearly, site acquisition is an eligible cost, and it's recently been expanded so that it's not just vacant land. You can now also buy an existing building. If you needed to purchase a new library building that you were going to renovate and retrofit to provide library services in, that's now an eligible cost. So either vacant land or an existing building to be used for library purposes is eligible. Brand new construction, very clear cut. If you're going to be building a new building from scratch, adding on to your current building, or demolishing part of a building you purchased to make into a library, or a portion of your existing building so that you can build a more efficient expansion, all of those things would be eligible under the program. Where it gets more into what most of our libraries are taking a look at, the whole category of renovation and rehabilitation is more likely. It's very rare one of our libraries gets to build a brand new building. So we're usually looking at optimizing what we already have. So here are things that are very clear in the regulations and in the guidance from the Division of Library Development. They're obviously very excited to fund things that are using green technologies like solar panels and geothermal systems. You can also do replacement of roofs and windows and doors. But here's where I'm going to remind you, you have to cross-reference what's eligible under the program with what the Mid-Hudson Board is looking to fund in that funding priorities that we took a look at before. So when you're writing your narrative about your project, should it be something related to replacement of roofs, windows, and doors, remember you're going to write that in the context of one of the funding priorities, which would really be smart if you were talking about energy conservation. So again, you need to contextualize these eligible costs within the Mid-Hudson Board's funding priorities. So the third one I wanted to really point out to you, reconstruction of existing space. This is not rearrangement or facelifts. This is actual construction. So you can't just say, oh, we're going to paint the building or paint the interior walls and buy some new furniture. That wouldn't work. You'd actually have to have construction going on that would then also result in painting the walls and getting some new furniture to be considered holistically eligible under the project. So obviously accessible aspects of your building are eligible, elevators. You can see electrical, plumbing, lighting, and HVAC. Again, I think those are ones that you're taking a look at the energy conservation side of things, is how you would sell that project to the Mid-Hudson Board. New driveways, sideways, and parking lots. Again, my tip for you of how to sell that to the board is to think about it from an accessibility standpoint, not just a kind of something that it's time to replace it, so that's why we're applying. You're going to have to talk it up a bit more in terms of how it meets the Mid-Hudson Board's funding priorities. Now, the last one there is a little bit of a bummer because the state used to fund furniture and equipment, including technology and bookshelves for any new project, regardless of, as long as it had been done in the past few years. But now they're requiring that in order to get money for furniture, equipment, technology, and shelving, it has to be in the context of a project that's actually dealing with construction renovation that's contained within the same application. So in the same funding cycle, you have to apply for both things, construction aspects of the project as well as these new fixtures and furnishings. So that's different if that's something you're thinking of applying for and you knew the last time you came to the Mid-Hudson Workshop, you knew you could apply for that on its own. You now no longer can apply for that on its own. It has to be in the context of a project that is going on at the same time in the same funding cycle or the same application. So these are relatively new things that are now eligible. I served on a committee for the state library to identify things that really should be fundable and were not at the time. So I'm happy to report that as of last year, we got these 4 items to now be eligible under the grant. We got the commissioner's regulations amended to include these 4 things now. I know Jim Cosgrove is on the call, and he benefited from this last year because he was able to do an outdoor sign, which is pretty awesome. You're going to see it featured in the Mid-Hudson Bulletin in an upcoming issue. But you can see emergency generators. That was an easy sell to the commissioner because of the aftermath of Hurricane Irene and Superstorm Sandy, and people started to really realize that libraries are absolutely what they are now calling first restorers. If they have the right equipment in place, if they can keep the library building going, it becomes a refuge for people that need to keep working, telecommuting, charging their devices. We heard a story recently, earlier this week actually, of a woman who needed to blow dry her hair for a job interview, and she had to come in and use the library's outlets and power supply. So generators are absolutely eligible. That can be a standalone project. The supervision and management of construction and renovation and rehabilitation projects is now eligible. So that means like a construction management firm for a larger project or a clerk of the works that you might hire to oversee your project and be the owner's rep. Those costs are now eligible under the grant program. And really exciting, I think, and very forward thinking on the state's part, we can now pay for broadband connectivity, bringing fiber directly to your building through this grant program, which in some areas of our system is actually a really important thing. I don't know how many of you looked at the new report that came out when the governor announced his $500 million program to increase broadband connectivity in New York State. But 2 of Mid-Hudson's counties that we serve here, Columbia and Greene, were actually 2 of the worst connected counties in the state when it came to broadband. So libraries are critical components of infrastructure that now can benefit from this construction money to bring fiber into the library building to ensure more New York residents have access to broadband connectivity. So really clearly what's not eligible, and our favorite phrase, routine maintenance, so things that should have been kept up and were not. So if you should have been painting the outside of the building every 10 years and you didn't, and now it's a wreck, or if it's something that should have been maintained and just hadn't been done in years, and oh, now it's time to fix that. Fixed jobs really have to be sold in the context of the funding priorities. So again, if you could say that, you know, the parking lot wasn't maintained well and its useful life didn't go as far as it should have, however, it's now become a hazard and accessibility issue, we can probably try to help make the case that it's still a fundable project. So be careful about things that might be considered routine maintenance. The state every single year changes its definition of what routine maintenance looks like. So it might be something that you'd have to consult with me on for us to figure out if it rides the line and if we think it's sellable or not to the board and to the state library. So super clear, architectural and engineering firm fees, not eligible. You couldn't pay for a building consultant feasibility study or your building program through this program. Obviously no interest or carrying charges for bonds or mortgage payments. And purchase of books, other library materials don't fall under that new fixtures and furnishings area that is eligible. That's considered materials, not fixtures and furnishings or equipment. And oddly enough, landscaping is not eligible. However, you can usually work in a little bit of landscaping if your project is doing something like tearing up the sidewalk or getting a new parking lot. There might be a way to fold that into that project, but standalone landscaping would not be eligible. So again, I'm going to really stress this because this is where I'm seeing libraries fall down in the application. You got to cross-reference those Mid-Hudson funding priorities with that just lovely list of eligible costs I gave you. So when people ask me, hey Rebecca, would my project be eligible? It's not a yes or no. It needs to be, that's like 50% of the question. Is this cost eligible and does it hit the Mid-Hudson Board's funding priorities? So part of it is your grant writing skill, how well you can sell what you're doing under one of those three categories. Remember, you're increasing services or increasing staff efficiency, you're increasing access either from a handicap accessibility standpoint or from bringing in a newer underserved population perspective, or you're taking a look at energy conservation. And honestly, the more of those three items your project hits, the higher your project will be ranked. So if you're doing a renovation project and you can say that you're going to expand programming space and it's going to be handicap accessible for the first time and you're going to use Energy Star standards to build that building, you just hit all three of the board's priorities. And that means you're going to be ranked #1 as we move forward in the award recommendation process. If your project is just a new roof, you were able to sell it from an energy conservation standpoint, you're going to get one of those three funding priority points, which means your project would be ranked lower. So in terms of thinking about the competitive nature of the program, which projects get ranked higher than others, it really boils down to how many of the board's funding priorities you can hit in your project. That determines how highly you're going to be ranked. And I'll explain why that matters when we get to how we dole out the money based on the rankings when we get to that component. Oh, and look, here we are. So this is a matching funds program. So one thing I noticed I didn't tell you, which is important to know, is that there is a minimum award amount. So if you've got a smaller project in mind, please keep in mind that the smallest grant award allowed is $2,500, which is a 50% match of a $5,000 project cost. So your minimum total project cost is $5,000. That should be the threshold that you're keeping in mind because the lowest award amount we can give is $2,500. And I will say to you that if you talk to your peers who have gone through this process, they might tell you the application process makes it not worth it if you're only asking for $5,000. But that's certainly your judgment to make and your context to make that decision within. Each library's financial situation is different, but it is a pretty involved process and it's a long process. So if it's a smaller project, this may or may not be the best choice for where you seek funding for it. So under the Commissioner's regulations, the regulations state that up to 50% of the total project approved costs are eligible to be matched. So just to be clear on that, when they say total project approved costs, that means costs that are actually eligible under the project. So you might have a total building or total project cost that includes materials and the construction management firm and also the architect's fees, but the architect's fees aren't eligible costs, so it's not something that we can reimburse on or can be used for matching funds. So the bigger your project, the more complicated that might get, but I just wanted to be clear that that's what they're talking about. Total project approved costs equals those eligible items that we just took a look at. So 3 years ago, we were able to change the regulation to say that now actually up to 75% of your total project approved costs can be matched if your library meets the Mid-Hudson criteria for serving an economically disadvantaged community. So that's a definition that we actually derive locally. Each of the 23 systems has their own definition for what economically disadvantaged means. So we're going to go over that definition. Again, this is something that's on the website I'm going to send you, so you don't have to write all of this down. But I think it lays out how you might be able to eke more money out of the grant program if you've got a really strong project. So if you take a look at this, these are ORs. You have to hit one of these three things to be considered for the higher match award. So if you are hitting your service area, and when we say a political subdivision, that's your chartered service area. So it might, if you're a school district public library, that'd be your school district. If you are a municipal public library, it would be your village or your town. Whatever your chartered service area is, that's what the political subdivision is. So if you took a look at the census demographics and you could see that more than 15% of the population is living in poverty, you would qualify under this definition of economically disadvantaged community. So if you didn't hit that, but you took a look at the school district that your library is within, and you have a 40% level of student enrollment that's eligible for free and reduced lunch, that is another way to qualify. So it's 1 or 2, or if you can't meet 1 or 2, you could take a look at 3, which has a lower threshold for both measures, both metrics. Either 10% of the population is living in poverty and 30% of the students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So again, it's either 1 or 2 or 3. You don't have to hit all of them. I think that's fairly apparent, but you never know. I find myself explaining that a lot, so I thought I'd be clear right from the beginning. So this is the reality of living in a system where we have a high level of construction needs. With 66 member libraries, we have one of the most we have the highest number of libraries in our system, and certainly the formula in terms of the money we receive through the program does take that into account. We do get more money than a system with less libraries, obviously. However, we also have libraries that are in very old buildings and have high level of need to keep them up and to make them relevant to today's world in terms of how people want to access library services in our building. So as I mentioned earlier at the top of our time together, we have 2.5 times the number in terms of dollars asked for than we have to give out. So what the Mid-Hudson Board has tried to do is to strike a balance. They're trying to look for giving as many libraries some money as they can, which means compromising the full grant award amount, meaning it's very rare that a library gets a full 50% or, if qualifying, 75% of their ask. So it's important to understand going in that you're highly likely not to get your full request amount. And if that is in fact the case, say we're only able to fund 20% of your request, you're going to have to prove that you have cash in hand to match the other 80%. So you're still going to have to fill the gap, even though the program is supposed to be a 50-50 match, because that way we're able to give more libraries money to get them closer to their goal. So I would say for big projects, you're definitely not looking at the Mid-Hudson portion of the state aid program to be one of the major portions of funding for a very big project. It's definitely going to be a supplemental stream of funding for your project. So the way we try to help mitigate this is after the board makes their recommendation for what they think your grant award amount should be moving forward, I'll call you and let you know what that is, and you can decide at that point, do you think you can still move forward understanding that's the amount of money you're going to get through the program. So as you are doing your application, and you'll see it's online, and they'll ask you, to prove your total project cost is, let's say $10,000. You have to prove you have at least $5,000 in the bank to match, a potential 50% grant. I'm going to probably call you or email you and say, do you actually have the full amount of money to finish this project? Because if the truth is you only have 50% of cash in hand and you could not do the project unless Mid-Hudson gave you the full 50%, you might not be in a great position moving forward in the grant program. And that's a very frustrating part of this project, both for you and us. So we just want to make sure we're upfront about that before you start down the road. And of course, if you have any questions about that, you can book some time with me and I'll be able to help walk you through that. So here's the timeline we're looking at. Here we are on April 24th doing our introductory webinar, and this was to help directors be able to fill out the construction needs memo. Every single library director in the system is filling this out. They're filling out at least part 1 to report to us how much construction need there is, regardless of whether or not they're in a good position to apply for a grant this year. The second part of the memo is where a director is declaring their intent to move forward and apply for the grant. And this helps us help you get through this process, because there are many hoops to jump through. And the earlier you're making the decision to go forward, the sooner you're able to get the needed components in place to be successful. So for those of you that are still on the line and think you're going to move forward with this, here's what we're taking a look at. The State Library has promised, and I say that in quotes, they have air quotes there, promised, the online application will be available June 1st. In the 10 or 12 years I've administered this program, it's actually never been on time, so we'll take that with a grain of salt, but hey, let's be positive. But you can see that I didn't actually plan our technical assistance workshop until June 18th. I'm just hedging my bets there. But if you haven't been through the process before and you would like to get a feel for what the application looks like and how you would get through it, we'll actually walk you through every piece of the application. So you see what it looks like, what the attachments are. There's a crazy number of attachments that you have to have in the application. So I'll actually walk you through the application step by step and provide technical assistance for you. There's the June 18th workshop, and you can also book office hour times with me over the summer to get you through the application process. So the Mid-Hudson grant application deadline is August 5th. So that's when your application has to be completely done and submitted to Mid-Hudson. And here's something that's really hard for me to say. There will be no extensions given. No extensions will be given after August 5th. We ran into some problems last year with libraries that had a bunch of paperwork that wasn't quite in on time, and they were relying on the goodness of Mid-Hudson to help them get through, and it caused a lot of administrative problems for us. So this year I'm going to do my best to be firm. I am going to be firm. There is no try, right? Do or do not. I'm going to be firm. There's no more extensions. So August 5th is the do or die date for having everything done, and I'm going to point out some of those things that could make your timeline hairy if you're not on top of them. So we have to set an earlier deadline than the state gives us because we have a lot of things that have to happen after you submit your application. So after you submit on August 5th, my job at Mid-Hudson is to review your application for completeness and to summarize that for the board committee that reviews your applications. And that's the incentive committee of the Mid-Hudson board. They review your applications. They do it in a way we call the blind. So they actually don't know which library they're looking at. They're purely judging your project on your impact statement and how well you met their funding priorities. So do a really good job on that impact statement. Remember, I told you I'm giving you the answers to the test. That's one of those answers to the test. Do a kick-ass job on the impact statement. So after that committee meets, they're going to meet towards the end of August or the beginning of September. They're going to make recommendations to the full Mid-Hudson board, and that's going to happen at the September 16th Mid-Hudson board meeting, and they'll consider the committee's recommendations and decide whether or not to approve those. Once they approve the award amounts, I then will work with you to clean up your application and get it ready to go to the state. There might be little things that I know will help smooth the way for the state approval. My review is actually the first of 3 reviews your application, or I guess you could say 4 reviews your application goes through. I do the first review, the Mid-Hudson board does the second review, and then they get sent up to the state library at the Division of Library Development, and their staff does a review, and then they'll kick back any questions to me if there's problems with your application. And then once they do that, then it goes to the 4th level. It goes to the Dormitory Authority, which if you remember way back to when we started our webinar today, that's the authority that actually bonds for the money. So their lawyers take a look at the applications too and kick back questions to the Division of Library Development, that kicks back questions to me that I might have to come back to you with. So this process, it does take some time. We're dealing with state bureaucracy. And I will tell you that the system always gets the applications up to the state on time. We've never had a problem doing that. But the process of the state review, it gets bogged down because the Division of Library Development has to review and approve every single library's application in the state. Not just Mid-Hudson, the whole state, before it can be moved on to the Dormitory Authority. So once it gets moved on to the Dormitory Authority, I know they shoot to do that by Thanksgiving. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Then the Dormitory Authority has to review every single application in the state, not just Mid-Hudson's. So we're in a batch of hundreds, sometimes 200 applications that all have to be vetted before decisions get made at the top level. So you don't actually find out if you're successful until May or June of next year, which makes this a year-long process to secure this money through the state aid program. So if you're thinking about cash flow issues, please take that into consideration. When you actually get cash in hand is usually around July, and interestingly enough, it's a 3-tier payment system. It's supposed to be you get a 50% payment, a 40% payment, and a 10% payment, but because the process takes so long, you get 90% right up front by that time because they've already passed one of their deadlines to figure out who's getting the money and when. So when we go back and think about the timing of your project, if you'll recall, I said that you shouldn't, if at all possible, don't start your project before July 1st. The other date to keep in mind is that August 5th, the system deadline. You can't finish your project before August 5th. You might finish it August 30th, that's going to be okay, but it can't be done before August 5th. So just another deadline to keep in mind. It could be finished before you figure out that you're actually getting the money in May and June. Of course, there's no guarantees in life, right? But I will say that in the 12 years that I've administered the program, I've never had the state question the board's recommendation. We do a pretty good job of vetting applications, making sure they're eligible costs that the state will accept, but it just takes a very long time to get the final approval from the state library and the Division of Budget to make sure you're going to actually get a check. So there is a bit of risk management that you have to consider if you're going to go ahead and finish your project up before your final notification, but many libraries do go ahead and do that. And that again speaks to the need to have all of the money in hand when you're applying to make sure you know you can finish the project regardless of what happens with the state grant. So here are the things that can mess up your timeline. These are things that are not in your control, that if you know you're moving forward, there's no reason not to just get this stuff done now. All of these things except for the first item are things that there is support information for on the website I'm going to give you. But think about it. When you're calling a contractor, and those of you that have dealt with contractors before know, they show up when they want to show up. If you've got a bid process as a public library that you have to go through, that also has an extended timeline. So build that into your timeline. You need actual contractor quotes to move forward with your application. You don't ultimately have to use the same quote you got in your application. Say you got a quote from Joe's Plumbing, that was what you based your ask on, and then now that you didn't get the money for another 12 months, Joe went out of business or you actually were able to cut a better deal, it's okay to go with a different contractor. But you actually have to have a contractor's bid or vendor quote document that you're going to upload with your online application. You can't use architectural estimates. So your architect, who might be a really awesome person, who's got a great track record, really spot on with guessing how much something's going to cost, you can't use those cost estimates. You actually have to talk to a contractor or a vendor and get an actual quote on their letterhead that you're going to upload with your online application. If your building is more than 50 years old, you may or may not need approval from the State Historic Preservation Office, which is also called SHPO. That's the acronym you see there, SHPO. They have a new deal they cut with the Division of Library Development, so they don't have to do as much paperwork. So there's some things they're already giving the thumbs up to. So there's a document that I've linked on the website I'm going to give you that you should read through if your building is more than 50 years old, and you might see what you want to do is already listed in the deal agreement they cut with the Division of Library Development. But if it's not something covered in the agreement with DLD, you're going to have to apply to them for public project approval, which means they have 30 days in which to respond to your request for their approval, and that's something that's required to be done by that August 5th deadline. So again, something not to procrastinate about if it applies to your project. The NYSERDA Energy Assessment, again, something that if you know you're going to go for a project that you want to aim for the Mid-Hudson funding priority of energy conservation, you've got to have that NYSERDA Energy Assessment done. There is, it used to cost $100, and now it doesn't, which sounds like an awesome thing, but now you have to fill out the consolidated funding application, which does take a bit of time. And they have consultants listed on the website that I'll give you the link to that help you through it. But again, it does take time. It's something that's not completely in your control and can screw up your timeline if you're headed for that August 5th deadline. To get into the online program, to actually do the application, you need to have something called a New York State Directory Service account. It's something you have to register for, and it's something that you don't receive immediately. So if you procrastinate, which I know none of you ever would procrastinate, but let's just say you procrastinated and you waited till 2 days before the deadline to enter in all of your information, it might actually take 48 hours to get your directory service account verification. So it's not something you're going to get immediately, so it's better to do that sooner rather than later. And a new upfront requirement is that now all libraries have to enter a New York State vendor ID into the application itself. They used to let you apply for one as part of your application package, but now they're requiring that you already have it in hand. And if you're scratching your head going, I've never even heard of a vendor ID, how do I know if I have one? It's probably a pretty good indicator that you don't have one, and you're going to have to go to the process to get it. So I'll show you where you can find that information to figure out how to do that. And another issue that is sounds so simple, but if you're starting your project early on, don't forget you need to have before and after photos of your project. So you actually file pictures with your online application. So make sure that if you're starting work before the application, you actually have before photos to use with your application. It's always easy to take the after photos. So this is the website that I put together just to kind of be the bucket to hold all this different information that you need to refer to during your grant application process. It's just midhudson.org/NYS construction grant, and you'll find everything that you saw with an asterisk next to it in this program, how to register for that account to get into the online application, how to get that vendor number that you are kind of wondering if you have or not, that State Historic Preservation Office documentation, a reminder of the board's priorities for funding, and that definition of economically disadvantaged, so you have things to refer back to as you go through the grant process. Of course, you can always call or email me and I'll get you what you need, but it's often nice when you're working late at night on a grant proposal to just have that stuff at your fingertips, so I thought that might be easier for you. I'll also email these slides to everyone who's registered, so you have everything to refer back to and can just click on this link to get to what you'd like to get to. So again, I mentioned the Technical Assistance Workshop. We're going to do that on Thursday, June 18th. If you want to save that date, June fills up fast for many people's calendars. So I just wanted to put that date out there early. So that again is that workshop where I'll walk you through the application step by step and explain all the attachments so you know exactly what to do. Most of that information is still on the state's website, the Divisional Library Development's website from last year's application process. So if you want right now, you can go in there and take a look at it. I actually went ahead and linked to it on the page I mentioned here. You can take a look at what a lot of the attachments look like. It doesn't mean that they will be exactly the same this year, but at least it gives you a sense of what to expect when they finally do release the online grant portal for 2015, which, as they said, they're shooting for June 1st to do that. So I'm leaving this for you here. Please don't procrastinate. You know I will bend over backwards to help you, and there are just some things I cannot help you with here if you don't help yourself. So pay attention to those things I mentioned that will take more time than you might wish it would, because those are things you should start sooner rather than later if you're going to go ahead with the grant application. I see that we have a couple of questions, and we do have a few minutes left. Oh, I guess only one question. To meet eligible school lunches. So someone was asking if they have to figure out if they are eligible for the economically disadvantaged community definition from Mid-Hudson, where would they get that information? I'll actually add links to where you go to get that info to the page. It's not currently there now, but I will add that to just give you a one step closer to getting the info for your library. It's usually something most libraries already know, whether what the levels of poverty are in their community that they serve and what the school lunch level is. You can always call the school district and ask for that information, but you can also get it online. I know you're all librarians, you can figure it out, but we'll also help you out by putting a get started link on the website that we created for you. If anyone has any other questions, you can put them in the chat box. But I will also say that, as you guys know, you can always call me or email me with questions. And we'll be advertising the Technical Assistance Workshop. And also I'll be setting up office hours that you can sign up for. We'll do those online or on the phone or in person, depending how deep your need is for assistance with figuring out how to move forward. And once the application is open, getting your application done. So again, we're here to support you. I think you've gotten almost all of the answers to the test through this program and the website that we've set up, but if you think there's something that I've missed or that you do still need help with, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm here to help you through the process, and I hope you found today useful. So we're at our end time. I will stay around for the next few minutes if anyone has a question in chat, but I understand that many people also have schedules to keep and need to get off the line right now. So I just want to thank you again. As I said at the top, I really appreciate that you're taking the time to learn more about this. It will make your life a lot easier knowing this information once you jump into that application, because it can be really overwhelming if it's your first time through. So thanks for taking the time to educate yourself, and I appreciate your time and attention today.